There we go. So we're underway. I'm very pleased today to welcome Chris Eustace as part of our interview project here. Thank you, Chris, for joining us.
Thank you.
And we'll begin, as we do with everyone, by asking some background questions for context. So I'll start out by asking you, number one, where were your parents born?
My parents were born, one was, my father was born in South America. My mother was born in Cairo, Egypt. And I am a product of my father, a soldier who was in 1945, 1944 in Egypt. And he phoned the telephone operator, who happened to be my mother, to find out where the action was in town. And she said, basically, well, this movie's playing at this cinema. My sister, that's my mother's sister, my aunt, she's the usherette, the ones that used to carry the flashlights and show you your seat. And my father said, well, that sounds good. She said, why, do you want me to show you where it is or whatever? He said, sure. They dated for a short while. And I was born about 9-10 months later. They got married. I was born 9-10 months later. And I was born at the base of the pyramids in Cairo, Egypt in 1945. Thereafter, our family moved to, after the war was over, to East Africa, Tanganyika, Kenya, and Uganda, because my father worked for East African Railways. So I was exposed to all the different cultures, all the different types of schools. And one of the schools I went to was a boarding school. And the boarding school I went to was run by Greeks in Kenya, because they were they had the best schools at the time, because they were quite well off, and they owned the sisal plantations. Sisal is a weed that makes rope, basically. So I was sent to a Greek boarding school where I learned to read, write, and speak Greek for the first 3 grades of my life. And as Sarah Pollen said regarding seeing Alaska out her bedroom window, I could see Mount Kilimanjaro outside my bedroom window for 3 years about. When that came about, and my father basically said, okay, let's move somewhere. And he was a British citizen. He flipped a coin. It's either England, it's either Canada or Australia. Canada won. So we went to Kitimat, BC, British Columbia, where my mother was doing quite well, actually, at the time, because French was coming in to be a subject of concern, to learn French. And she, and with only grade 6 education, but she was a telephone operator, she could read, she could speak 6 languages. So that did quite well. Then a few years later, we moved to Montreal because the job in Kitimat, BC, Alcan Aluminum died out. And I went to school in basically starting grade 7 in Point St. Charles. I went there for a couple of years, then moved to NDG. And my sense of justice on certain things landed me in Weardale, a boys' home, for about 1.5 years, which turned out to be not a bad experience. So I finished Weardale for about 1.5 years, graduated in grade 11. Then I didn't know what to do. I got involved with a young lady, and one thing led to another, and we had a child or two, and I wasn't quite sure what to do. So we drove to Florida. We came back from Florida, and I noticed that there was an ad in the newspaper that said, do you want to become a teacher? Well, if you got a Bachelor of Arts degree or something like that, $110, St. Joseph's Teachers College, come and sign up. So I went to St. Joe's, as they used to call it in those days. I went there and I got a teacher's diploma and became a teacher. And I taught at Pierrefonds Comprehensive High School for about 34, 35 years. And that's basically my educational career. And that's my basic background in that respect. That's a quick summary of it.
Oh, well, you've answered 4 out of 5 of my questions. That's great. Thank you.
Okay.
I'll just finish up by asking you the last one, which is the easiest.
Yep.
Where do you live now?
I live in Pierrefonds. I've been living in Pierrefonds since the West Island, basically. Part of that, it was Point Claire for a while. But basically, I'm a West Islander, yeah. Okay, and I have children, grandchildren. I'm also a great-grandfather.
Now, before I go on to the next section, which are questions concerning your experience living in Quebec today, I want to mention, which I may have mentioned before, at the risk of repeating myself, I will not be commenting on your responses, nor will I be asking any follow-up questions. And the reason for that is because this is for educational purposes. I want the questions and the responses to stand out, and the questions have been formulated to be very unbiased. So I don't want to appear to be interfering or coaching you in one direction or another. But having said that, you're free to answer in any way you see fit. Fair enough?
Oh, fair enough. Am I permitted to name individuals in a positive and or negative sense?
Say anything you like.
That's all I want to hear. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. So these are questions concerning your experience living in Quebec today. And we'll start off by asking the first question. What is the best thing about living in Quebec today?
The best thing about living in Quebec today is that I have freedom to do whatever I want, purchase anything I want, go to anything that I want regarding English matters, for example, TV, movies, etc., restaurants. I have no problems at all. I thoroughly enjoy living in Quebec. There's no question about that.
Now, the next question, I'm going to preface it by telling you a lot of people have had a lot of problems with this question. Certainly, if it was posed to me, I would. However, I'm going to ask you to respond to the question as stated, but you can elaborate on your response as much as you'd like. So having said that, describe your relationship to Quebec in a single word.
The word would be fine. Now, what I mean by fine is basically there are ups and downs. There are ups and downs sometimes, but part of the problem, what I have found out in recent years is that this conflict, for lack of a better word, saying between the French and English and the history program, which I'd like to expand on shortly, and I'm glad that your partner is Brian Rock. He knows exactly what I'm going to say and what I'm talking about, is another matter. So it has its ups and downs. But as far as generally speaking, I have children, four of them, two of them are pretty bilingual. The other two had friends that were not bilingual. My grandchildren, they're all bilingual. My great-grandchild is a combination of everything. So to answer your question, everything's fine. We have our ups and downs once in a while. And I've been quite involved in the education sector. I write a lot. Anyway, maybe that's not what you want to hear at this point, but I can expand more on that a little bit later.
And where do you feel most at home in Quebec? For example, in communities based on language, culture, profession, or geographic location?
I feel most, well, you missed the word there, I think, a profession or geographic location. I feel best in schools, around education centers. It's as simple as that. Because I deal with people that were on the same wavelength most of the time, and they understand we have our own language, so to speak. Educators do. That's where I feel most comfortable.
Okay. Now, the next question I'm going to preface again, because the second part people have asked me about. They say, well, Dave, what do you mean by official definition of Quebec? And what I mean is, it's what you perceive the official definition to be. It could be based on what the Quebec government says, what the federal government says, what your peers say, what you see on the media. So whatever you perceive to be the official definition. So I'll ask the two-part question. How would you define a Quebecer? And do you think the official definition in Quebec includes you?
I would define a Quebecer as someone who is content in living in Quebec, someone who's basically happy, basically who's happy with their roots, basically who's happy with their neighbors, and most governments most of the time. Of course, there are differences, but I have found on a personal point of view, personally, that whether it's a Parti Quebec government or the Liberal Party or the CAQ, I found them all very respectful most of the time towards the English minority. In fact, more often than that. But to carry that on further, my official definition in Quebec, I'm a Quebecer. I live here. I don't think anything else. I would never, but never think of moving to Toronto because of Bill this and Bill that or whatever. Out of the question completely. I'd be lost over there. I'd be bored, actually. That's it.
Now, has your sense of identity as a Quebecer changed over the years? And if so, in what ways?
No, my sense of identity has become stronger as a Quebecer. I can empathize more, and I'm not really a bilingual person, but I do read the French papers, and I get an idea what's coming off. I empathize more with the French people than I used to. I remember as a teenager, when I was walking from Weardale Boys Home to Westmount High School, the FLQ was around at the time, and they were bombing up mailboxes. And I remember passing a couple of those mailboxes at that time. By the way, I was about 15, 16 at that time. So, and I remember the time, at that time, between us young minds, at that time, I repeat, I was only 15, we would call these French people, always it's a bad name, all their Pepsis and all that, and negative remarks and all that. But I've gone over the years, I've got to know many of them. I've got to read their culture and understand them a lot better. And I'll be perfectly frank with you. I appreciate the French quite often, more often than I appreciate my own nationality, and that is being English. And I'll further examples on that later on.
And what are some of the most difficult things in your mind about living in Quebec today?
The most difficult things in your mind, in my mind anyway, I have no problems with anybody. My biggest problem is dealing with my colleagues, the English community, in which there are some people in the English community who think that they have a monopoly on education. They know what's best. And they proclaim themselves as to be the saviors of the English community. And they come up with ridiculous, radical statements. For example, just last week, we had two MNAs, well, same thing, MNAs, who apologized for making mistakes regarding Bill 96. I'm talking about Jeff Kelly and Jennifer Macaron especially, but especially Jeff Kelly, the son, who said basically, no, Bill 96 regarding health matters. And no, Bill 96 never said that the English would be deprived of, I have 3 or 4 doctors, one just retired, so that's why I say 3 or 4. I deal with hospitals, and from the parking lot attendant at the hospital to the doctor who's overseeing me as I'm lying on the table, getting this operation or whatever, no problems at all. I've been treated with utmost respect. There's no problems at all regarding health as far as I'm concerned. None whatsoever. I've never had any problems.
Now, in recent years, some members of Quebec's Francophone majority have identified a number of linguistic and cultural threats. Which of these do you share and support, and which of these concerns make you feel excluded or targeted?
Now, that's a very difficult question. The question is basically asking what the Francophones think, basically, of us, if I understand it correctly, has identified as a number of linguistic and cultural threats. I think what the French people are concerned about and are worried about is being overtaken by the continent of North America, by the English. They're surrounded by English. And I remember very well Hérouville, that town in the outskirts of Montreal, by Mario Dumont, the leader of the ADQ at the time, and the sugar shacks who were selling pork with their beans, and they did, and the sort of anti-Muslim thing. But it wasn't in my mind so much anti-Muslim. It was, we're going to be overrun. We're going to be overrun. Somebody's got to take care of our culture. And this is where, in my opinion, where Mario Dumont took off with his party at the time, with whom I met, by the way, and then Francois Legault later on, as we know. So I'm not quite sure if I answered your question there entirely. Which of the concerns makes you feel excluded or targeted? I'm not excluded or targeted from anyone in this province. Once in a while, I don't understand something in French properly when I read something. Well, big deal. I'll Google it or look it up. It's as simple as that. And I'll find out. It's there. I also think the French are making a bigger deal, some of them, about us, we English. Like they're worried. And in my opinion, they're worried unnecessarily. But there is a concern there. I can appreciate, as I'm getting older, I do appreciate it. And from what I read from very, very intelligent people, and what I read in Le Devoir, they know what they're talking about. And by the way, I've known some of these people. I'm going to be 78 years old in 2 days. So I've been around for a while. So I know who these people are. Like, for example, I know Jean-François Lisée, I know Mario Dumont, I know François Legault, and it's no secret, by the way, that I definitely agree with the education plans that the Liberals had years ago, and Pauline Marois, the Parti Québécois, about giving more power to the schools, making the parents, giving them leadership roles. But then we have people like, and this is and I use the word enemy in quotation marks, the Quebec English School Boards Association, who are right now using taxpayers' money campaigning across Canada, blasting this Bill 40 business, which I'm very much in favor of. The same as I was with Bill 86. But then you had the Liberal Party back to Bill 86, headed by, at that time, Mr. Couillard, who would say, listen, we're going to make our schools the center of gravity. The Quebec English School Boards Association does not represent all the people. And he was perfectly right. And I was saying, yay, way to go, Doc Philippe Couillard. And all of a sudden, completely collapsed when the Quebec English School Boards Association, headed at that time by Jennifer Macaron, present MLA at Westmount, oh no, my children will suffer. Well, they'll be experimented on because we won't have commissioners. We're going to have directors instead, or counselors. And it's all the same thing. When it comes to student success, all that matters is what's happening in the school between teacher and student. And by the way, I should say in brackets, I missed something very important. As you know, Bill 40, the education bill, is now in the courts. We're waiting for a decision. I was an intervener in that case, the only one. And I've written papers. I was allowed to speak for 2.5 hours, spread over a year and a half, to 4 different judges, Superior Court, Court of Appeal. I submitted all kinds of papers, which I ironically put them all together. And last weekend, and I will forward them to you if you're interested, they went to all the premiers of Canada, all the school board associations in Canada, all the ministers of education in Canada, which includes all my testimony and everything else. And the only people who have not got it, including all the commissioners, by the way, they've got it all. Everybody's got everything. In fact, I'm pretty sure Brian Rock has got a copy of everything I sent just last week. You can double check with him if you wish. Now we got sidetracked from the question. Yes. So in terms of education matters, my enemy in quotation marks is the Quebec English School Boards Association, whether it's the Parti Québécois, the Liberal Party, or the CAQ. They're all basically saying the same thing. We want to give the schools back to the parents, back to the people who are closest to our children. But no. QESBA, that's Quebec English School Boards Association. Oh, no, that's going to be, no, they'll be running it. No, they can't do that. They can't do this. And yet the truth of the matter is, these people, and I know since day one, which is 1998, have done nothing. And I mean nothing for the English community. I'm talking about education now here only. When it came to textbooks, all of a sudden the Gazette in April of 2008, headline, no English textbooks. Why is that? Because the French, because the English community said, oh, everything's being handled. And we had ministers of education blasting, criticizing our own English community are leaders, in quotation marks, for not doing their job properly, taking care of us, and they fix things up. Same thing with the CAQ, which are basically doing the same thing regarding Bill 40, and they're claiming, QUESBA, that no, there's everything, it's not right. We want to be leaders. And I've written papers on this, and there's been letters to the editor written about this, and I think, and I'll send the whole package to you if you want afterwards. We want basically the directors general to be the spokesperson of the institutions like the schools, not elected politicians who basically are in their self-interest. There's money involved here. Let's face it. I could go on for hours on end, but I know you only want a half-hour interview, but I will send you a package. Do you mind if I send it to you as well?
Please do.
Okay. Do I send it to ComECH?
Yeah, send it to the ComECH email address.
Okay, I will. After this, I will.
Very good. Now,
okay.
Having said all of that, Chris, what is the biggest problem in your mind facing Quebec today, and how do you think it could be resolved?
The biggest problem in Quebec today. The biggest problem in Quebec today is, and I think it's being solved slowly but surely, and that is the feelings that the French have about the English. They figure that we English are going to be dominated by, we English are going to dominate the French groups. And there is something I want to say regarding sidetrack here a bit, because this is very, very important. The English, contrary to what people may think, they are not one big united group. And I want to give you an example since we're talking about history. I should also mention, by the way, for the past 20 odd years, I've attended school board meetings of Lester B, all of them, 23 years, English Montreal, maybe about 15 years, and the parents' committees of both school boards for the past several years. I also am the public at the governing board at the school that I used to work at, Pierrefonds Comprehensive High School. Now, a few years ago, the English Montreal School Board came up with something. They proposed that the Minister of Education, quote, that the history program, I'm reading a letter that I wrote to everybody, which is their words, a minimum of 20% of the program be devoted to honoring the diverse linguistic and cultural history of Quebec's minorities, First Nations, Anglophone and Allophone communities. The EMSB encouraged, quote, sister English boards to pass similar resolutions in the hope that the education department will do something that is truly reflective of Quebec's history to better educate our students. The Lester B. Pearson School Board, though, with the chair at that time, who later on had to resign, was not helpful. She basically said, and this with no surveys, no polls, no questionnaires, Chairperson Sue-Ann Stein-Dace reportedly said in the papers, we were surprised about the high percentage of EMSB teachers who were unhappy with the course. We have consulted with our history teachers and there are no complaints. West Island Gazette, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And here's where the real problem is. And I can see where the French are coming from. Who's speaking for the English community? We've got the English Montreal School Board saying they want more history, 20%. And here we got the Lester B. Pearson School Board saying, and imagine you're the French in the office, tout le chose est correct, Lester B. a dit, tout le chose à histoire est correct, oh oui, and they forget about it. Then you got guys like me and some others who write negative letters about these institutions who claim that they're fighting for us, and they're doing a disservice. They can't even get along together. I'll tell you another little story that happened about 5 years ago. There was the head office being built downtown from the English Montreal School Board. roughly, by the way, where your Coles store was, near Stanley and St. Catherine or whatever. The EMS, that's EMSB property, and they extended their offices for whatever reason. Well, that's going to be a Pearson School Board decides to invade the same area. Whoa! So we wrote blistering letters, Professor John Bradley and I, to the Suburban, which were published. Say, wait a second here. Lester B, your property's over here, your boundary's over here, the West Island. I'm pointing outside my window because I'm in the West Island. English Montreal, this downtown area, basically. So we English are not one big happy family. We're not. Forget that. And nobody speaks for us. There are those who claim they do, but they don't. There you go.
Okay. Now, I'm going to pause for a second and just ask,
Sure.
Have you had an opportunity to see the documentary by Guy Rogers, What We Choose to Remember?
I met Guy Rogers at the demonstration last May and June. The big demonstration opposite McGill University. And he saw me with my sign. And he said, may I take a picture or something? I didn't know this fellow. I said, sure. Click, click, click. Who are you? Who am I? Bring it back. Well, I'm Guy, I wrote his name down, Guy Rex Rogers. And he said, look, I got to film out What We Choose to Remember. I saw it twice.
Okay.
I told him I would recommend it to the Lester B. Pearson School Board, which I did. And we communicated with each other back and forth. I informed Beryl Wiseman, the editor of the Suburban, about him and the film. They're all aware of it. And they're all aware of Mr. Rogers and my connection of sorts with him. But more important, connection with this subject. The film that he made was excellent.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, yes,
Okay.
I'm familiar.
And I'll tell you why I paused and I brought that up. Because if you recall in his film, he used a very effective visual tool, which I'm about to use today
Okay.
in our discussions and which I use with everybody. It's a show of fingers. So I'd like you to indicate.
Oh, yeah.
By the way, I have Guy's permission to do this.
Okay.
Indicate by a show of fingers on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being weakest, 10 being strongest. How strongly do you feel that the joys of living in Quebec outweigh the challenges?
5 is the highest, right?
So 10 is the highest.
10 is the highest.
1 is the lowest.
The question is,
could you raise your hands a little higher? I couldn't see them there. Very good. Thank you very, very much.
okay, I want to make sure. So to repeat your question again, I want to make sure I got it straight.
On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being weakest, 10 being strongest, indicate by a show of fingers, how strongly do you feel that the joys of living in Quebec outweigh the challenges?
There you go again.
Very good.
You see that?
Yeah, I sure can. Thank you very much.
Okay,
Now,
no.
to finish off, Chris, I'm just going to ask you if there's anything else that you would like to say about your sense of identity or belonging in Quebec.
My identity in Quebec, I'm happy with my identity in Quebec. Now, let's just to backtrack on certain rules. There are 3 main laws that came out in the past few years. Bill 21, the religious clothing law and all that. I agree with it basically, but I have written, and by the way, I've written briefs. They're all on the National Assembly website. Bill 21, I said there's no reason why teachers can't wear a hijab, hammock, or whatever. You know, our children should be exposed to the different religions, etc. And that's it, period. So I've written that down. Regarding Bill 40, well, there's no question there. I'm a gung-ho supporter of that, which I'm going to send you information on that. There's no question there. As far as Bill 96 goes, I'm a teacher. I'm an educator. I am not a lawyer. I'm not a businessman. There are some things that apply to law and to business, which I can't really comment on, but I do wish that for Bill 96, that immigrants who come in, instead of being only allowed to go to school for 6 months or learn the language in 6 months or whatever the time frame is. And by the way, there are letters to the editor, and again, it's in my brief in the government's website. It should be longer than that. You know, give the immigrants a break. I mean, they want to come here. I mean, if you got somebody who is very talented, I'm just making this up now, a businessman who's got some very good ideas to offer, and he's English, and he wants to send his kids to English school, let him, for crying out loud. It's going to build up the economy, good for the children, good for himself and all that. And the way I see things, the way things are going is that there's a lot of French being taught as well at in the English schools. Now, the bottom line would always be, the way I feel about it, and I've written letters on this, we should have completely bilingual schools, right down the middle, period, end of story, and that's it, point final.
That's great, Chris. Listen, I want to thank you very much for participating. Everybody's point of view is welcome in this project. I encourage it. We're talking to people all the way from the Magdalen Islands, all the way to the border of Ontario, everybody in between, as long as they are English speakers, regardless of their background, their status, their jobs. We want to hear from them, and
Yep.
you certainly contributed to that process today. And I want to thank you very much. It's been great speaking with you, and thank you.
And thank you, and I'll send you what I sent to everybody across Canada in the next few minutes.
Absolutely. That's great. Thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you.
Have a great week.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
What do